Getting a role that defines your life is a blessing. Some people would say it is a curse. Because there was a time when American sitcoms did not just make people famous. They turned unknown faces into stars. Friends did that. Seinfeld did that. Cheers did that too. But Hollywood has never been generous without making people pay for it. Some got swallowed whole by the shadow of an old character. Some struggled with addiction and then got cast aside. And some survived a horrifying assault in real life, but still never got the audience's sympathy. This is not just a story about failed comebacks. This is the price of once being too familiar, too loved, and too tied to a golden era that nobody could hold on to forever. Today, let's take a look at the sad story of 15 sitcom stars who tried to come back and could not make it happen. Number 1. Matthew Perry Friends. If Chandler Bing was America's laugh track, then what came after for Matthew Perry turned into one of the darkest stories American television ever left behind. Back then, Chandler Bing was not just a hit sitcom role. He was the rhythm. He was that smart, bitter, slightly awkward kind of funny, where Perry only had to raise an eyebrow, and the audience was already laughing. Friends made him explode into stardom, and took him farther than just about any actor from his generation. What always gets to me about Perry is that he did not just sit there living off old memories. He threw himself into Studio 60, then Mr. Sunshine, then Go On, then The Odd Couple. He did everything a TV star is supposed to do to come back. Some projects came with high expectations, some opened strong. Some looked like this might finally be the one that really took off, but they still came and went quietly or half out of breath, and none of them became a new chapter big enough to replace Chandler. Reuters noted that Go On opened very strong, then lost viewers hard before getting cancelled, and treated it as yet another miss for Perry after Friends. But if this had only been about work, maybe the story would not have been this sad. What really crushed Matthew Perry was the real-life battle with addiction health problems, and all those days where he had to fight for sobriety one day at a time. Perry even admitted he had spent about $9 million trying to get sober, and wanted people to remember him for helping others who were fighting addiction. Can you believe that? So when I look back at Matthew Perry, I do not see a star who simply could not make a comeback. I see a man who kept trying to get back up, while both the shadow of his old role and the darkness inside himself kept dragging him back down. And in Hollywood, that is usually the kind of tragedy that opens the door to even more bitter stories. Number 2. Fran Drescher. The Nanny. Fran Drescher survived a gunpoint assault, survived uterine cancer, and yet the one thing she never escaped was the laugh and voice that once made America fall in love with her. Fran Drescher made it through things that would have broken just about anybody. A sexual assault, a marriage falling apart, a cancer diagnosis. And yet in the end, the longest-lasting cage in her life was a fictional woman in tight dresses, high heels, and a laugh nobody on earth could imitate. And Fran Fine really was a television miracle. Not conventionally pretty, not safely funny. She was loud, bright, a little too much, and so charming you could not resist her. The Nanny ran from 1993 to 1999, and Fran Drescher did not just star in it. She pretty much created the heartbeat of that whole show. You hear that voice once and you remember it forever. You see that hair once and you never forget it. That is what a real star can do. And because she created a character that complete Fran was almost never allowed to become anyone else. She came back with Living with Fran, then happily divorced. Still funny, still glowing, still the kind of woman who could step into a frame and make everything feel more alive. But American television looked at her in a way that was too fixed. The audience did too. They did not want a new character. They only wanted another variation of Fran Fine. Happily Divorced lasted 2 seasons and then stopped, and it never became the kind of new sensation the Nanny once was. That honestly has always felt unfair to me. Fran Drescher did not lose because she was weak. She was not lacking strength, and she sure was not lacking life. She was just too special in a way television did not know how to love a second time. And sometimes, that is the kind of failure that makes people feel the saddest. Number 3. Michael Richards, Seinfeld. Michael Richards did not just fail at coming back. He stepped in front of the public one more time, then turned that comeback into something all of America would remember in the worst possible way. Back when he was Kramer on Seinfeld, Richards was a whirlwind. He did not need many lines to steal a scene. The second that body pushed the door open and walked in, the rhythm of the whole show changed. It was that kind of explosive physical comedy American television does not get very often. And because Kramer was that powerful, NBC believed Richards could carry his own sitcom after Seinfeld. But the Michael Richards show got slammed, pulled weak ratings, and got cancelled very fast. The LA Times called it a major public failure and a hard one to defend. But if it had stopped there, Michael Richards still would have just been another former sitcom star who ran out of gas after a career-defining role. What really buried his comeback came later. During a stand-up set at the Laugh Factory in 2006, Richards got angry at the audience and started throwing out racist remarks. People reported that this was the moment that sent his career into a tailspin and almost pushed him out of the spotlight for years. And maybe that is the most bitter part. Michael Richards did not just lose to his old role, he also lost the very moment that was supposed to help him move forward. And the next person's tragedy will not be that loud, but it will be quiet and long-lasting in a different way. Number 4. Scott Baio, Happy Days. There was a time when Scott Baio was treated by the networks like he was the future of the American sitcom. But that future faded fast. Baio broke out as Chachi Arcola on Happy Days, popular enough that ABC spun him off into Joni Loves Chachi. That alone tells you everything. The network really believed this young guy could pull an audience with his own name. After that, he also had Charles in Charge, which ran for several seasons and kept him highly recognizable in the sitcom world of the 80s. Scott Baio was not some lucky one-hit face. He was a serious investment for American television. But then, the step that was supposed to turn him into a star standing on his own came up short almost immediately. Joni Loves Chachi did not last long, and that was pretty much the first warning. The glow of a beloved character is not always enough to build a whole new empire. Later on, Baio still had shows, still appeared on TV, still tried to keep himself in the game. The only problem was, there was never a second chapter big enough. There was never a comeback that made people sit up and say, yeah, Scott Baio got his moment back. That is the kind of failure Hollywood creates all the time. Not loud, not final. Just a face that was once promised too much, slowly shrinking with the years until private life controversies started casting a shadow over what was left of the good memories. And the next person's tragedy will not be about a promise slowly fading like that. It will break right in the place that should have been safest and with the most ideal opportunities. Number 5. Matt LeBlanc, Friends. A lot of people crash after a sitcom because they have to leave the role of a lifetime behind and start feeling their way forward from scratch. Matt LeBlanc did not have that problem. NBC handed him the exact gift every former TV star dreams about. They took Joey Tribbiani straight into a new series. No makeover, no risky jump into another genre. Just keep being Joey. You also have to remember what his golden era looked like. Friends was a 10-season phenomenon, and the finale in 2004 pulled about 52.5 million viewers. That was not just a big ending. That was practically the closing bell on a whole golden age of American network sitcoms. In the middle of that phenomenon, Matt LeBlanc got 3 Emmy nominations for lead actor in a comedy series, enough for NBC to believe he could carry a post-Friends chapter on his own. Then Joey premiered like an event. The first episode pulled about 18.6 million viewers, but that was almost the only high point. People showed up out of curiosity, then left very quickly. The ratings kept falling. NBC moved the schedule around. The show got put on hiatus in the middle of season 2. In the end, even finished episodes never all made it to air on NBC. That was no longer just a new sitcom running out of steam. That was a public comeback getting pulled away by the network itself halfway through. And this is the part that feels cruel to me. NBC understood correctly that Joey was very popular, but they misunderstood why Joey was popular. On Friends, he worked because an entire perfect world existed around him. Pull Joey away from the group and the magic disappears. Number 6. Jason Alexander Seinfeld. Jason Alexander is the kind of proof Hollywood hates admitting somebody can have the talent, the name, the recognition, and the visibility. And the second he leaves a huge hit, the magic disappears instantly. To be fair, Jason Alexander was never some secondary piece on Seinfeld. He was George Costanza, one of the most important engines of comedy in the whole series. Seinfeld ran for 9 seasons, and the finale in 1998 pulled about 76.3 million viewers, a number that still feels almost unreal for an American sitcom. And Alexander got 7 Emmy nominations for George. This was not an actor catching some leftover shine by standing next to a hit. He was a vital part of the whole phenomenon. That is exactly why the fall afterward felt so bitter. After Seinfeld, Alexander got placed right at the center of Bob Patterson on ABC. A big face, a new sitcom, a very obvious opportunity. And then the show got cancelled after exactly 5 aired episodes. It did not slowly lose steam, it broke almost immediately. Then he got Listen Up on CBS. This time it did not die as fast as Bob Patterson, but it still only lasted 1 season. That is the most painful part of this case. If you fail once, people can still call it bad luck. But when there is another chance, another network, another show, and the result is still the same, then it stops looking like an accident. It becomes a pattern. I have always felt Jason Alexander did not fail because he lacked talent. He failed because American television misunderstood what made him great in the first place. George Costanza does not work all by himself. That character exploded because he kept colliding with the whole Seinfeld machine. Pull Alexander out, place him center stage, and ask him to recreate that magic all over again, and it turns out that was asking too much. And the next person will show a different kind of failure when the public still has goodwill, but the comeback still cannot lift off. Are you curious who that is? Number 7. Michael J. Fox, Family Ties. Michael J. Fox had something a lot of stars trying to come back. Never Get All of America was on his side. Nobody wanted Michael J. Fox to fail. Nobody looked at him with disgust or suspicion. If anything, he was the kind of face the American public has almost always felt something special for. And because of that, when the comeback could not get off the ground, it felt even more bitter than a lot of louder public collapses. Family Ties ran for 7 seasons, won 5 primetime Emmys, and Michael J. Fox himself took home 3 Emmy wins for playing Alex P. Keaton. That was not a lucky popular role. That was the role that made him a real sitcom star in America. Then Spin City came along and made his place on television feel even more solid. So when NBC made a big bet on the Michael J. Fox show, people had every reason to think this would be a beautiful return. But it was not. The show got heavily promoted, was treated like one of the big cards of the fall season, then quickly ran out of steam because the ratings were weak. NBC even had to pull it out of the Thursday night lineup, which was almost like admitting the original confidence was gone. And that is where American television is always equally cruel. The audience can love a person. They can admire everything he has been through. They can sincerely want him to win. But weekly television does not run on goodwill. It runs on ratings, on cold numbers. Number 8. Delta Burke. Designing Women. Delta Burke is the kind of Hollywood story nobody there ever wants to hear. Again, a woman can become a major star and still get ground down by that same industry just because of her gender. Delta Burke's story did not begin in the spotlight. It began with the price of what came after the spotlight. Pressure about her looks, tabloids, endless scrutiny, mental breakdowns. People treated her not like a talented actress, but like something to pick apart. And by the time she stepped into her comeback attempts, Delta Burke was no longer a star on the rise. She was a woman carrying way too many wounds from the very years when she had been most famous. Then the comebacks came, and none of them could save her. Delta was built by ABC as a starring vehicle just for her, but it died very fast. After that came Women of the House, basically an attempt to pull audiences back to what they once loved about Suzanne Sugarbaker. Sounds logical enough, but even that return using the smell of the old magic still could not hold on. The LA Times put it plainly, one failed comeback, then another quick cancellation right after it. And that is what makes this case more painful than people think. Designing Women ran for 7 seasons. Delta Burke got 2 Emmy nominations for Suzanne Sugarbaker. She was not some face who popped up for fun and then vanished. She was a real star. Number 9. Shelley Long, Cheers. Some actors fall because a role does not work out. Shelley Long was different. She spent most of her post-Cheers life under the shadow of one decision. Leaving after season 5 while the show kept thriving for years after that is the kind of thing Hollywood never fully forgives. From that moment on, every step she took got viewed like an answer to the same old question: was leaving Cheers worth it? Diane Chambers was not some ordinary sitcom lead. Shelley Long got 6 Emmy nominations for that role and won 1. Emmy and the Sam and Diane relationship was one of the biggest engines pulling audiences to Cheers in its early years. She was a real star, a vital part of that magic. That is exactly why the comeback with Good Advice feels so sad. This should have been the kind of new chapter strong enough to make people stop talking about that old bar in Boston. But the show had a rocky debut, ran briefly, then died early after 19 episodes. It was not big enough, not sharp enough, and definitely not successful enough to change the story that had already attached itself to Shelley Long's name. Number 10. Bronson Pinchot. Perfect Strangers. Bronson Pinchot had a problem not every sitcom star faces. He was too unusual to be forgotten, and also too unusual for American television to keep loving for the long haul. That is Bronson Pinchot's own special kind of bitterness. Some actors fail because they do not have enough personality. He had the opposite problem. That very uniqueness became the wall blocking his way back. And in Hollywood, that is a nastier trap than people think. Back when he was Balky Bartokomous on Perfect Strangers, Pinchot was not just funny. He pretty much created the whole rhythm of the show. Perfect Strangers ran for 8 seasons, around 150 episodes, and the role of Balky even brought him an Emmy nomination for lead actor in a comedy series. That was not some lucky supporting role that just happened to hit at the right time. That was a character strong enough to turn an actor into a real sitcom face of late 80s America. Then came the most painful part. After Perfect Strangers, Pinchot still had chances. He did not vanish right away. American television tried putting him at the center with The Trouble with Larry. The show died very fast. Then came Mego. Once again, nobody stayed long enough. This was no longer one isolated miss. It was a pattern. They kept trying to build a second chapter for Bronson Pinchot, and every time they ran into the same truth, The thing that made him famous was not something you could easily package into a brand new formula. And the next person's story will have a different color, less eccentric, but just as bitter. Number 11. Kirstie Alley Cheers. Kirstie Alley was never short on name recognition. What she was missing in the end was a sitcom strong enough to make audiences love her again the way they once did. Kirstie Alley was not the kind of star who leaves a hit and disappears for good. She was still there. The press still wrote about her. The public still remembered her. The problem is being remembered and being welcomed back on a sitcom are two completely different things, and Hollywood usually only realizes that when it is already too late. To be fair, Kirstie Alley really had been hugely famous. As Rebecca Howe on Cheers, she did not just fill the gap after Shelley Long left, she turned that character into a success, all its own, winning an Emmy and a Golden Globe in 1991. Then later, she had Veronica's Closet, a sitcom that actually climbed into the top group of NBC's ratings in its early seasons. This was not somebody who only got lucky once. Kirstie Alley really had proved she could do it more than one time. That is exactly why the comeback with Kirstie sounds so sad. A show carrying her own name, aimed right at public recognition, even with a reunion element there to pull in nostalgic viewers, and it still died after exactly one season. At that point, it was no longer about lacking opportunity. It was a flat-out failure. Number 12. David Schwimmer. Friends. Some failed comebacks explode right in front of all of America. David Schwimmer's did not. His case feels much colder than that. Every time he comes back, people just remember the role he played on Friends. Friends ran for 10 seasons and became a global phenomenon, and Ross Geller was never standing outside the spotlight. He was half of the Ross and Rachel story, one of the biggest emotional engines in the whole series. David Schwimmer also got an Emmy nomination for that role. He was not some face benefiting from leftover group glory. He was a vital part of the machine that got all of America to sit down every week. Then came the comeback attempts with intelligence as the clearest example. On paper, everything sounded pretty solid. Schwimmer starred in it, helped executive produce it, and showed up right when Peacock and Sky needed a comedy with a recognizable name. But Variety said the show lacked real lift, and that is exactly how this comeback died, not loudly, not through some disaster, just because nobody stayed long enough. I have always felt this kind of failure is sad in its own way. David Schwimmer did not do much wrong. It is just that sometimes you can do everything right, and the audience still does not want to see you again, the way they once did. And the next person's tragedy will have a different color. Some stars become so huge that every later comeback gets swallowed whole by their own glorious history. Number 13. Kelsey Grammer, Cheers/Frasier. Maybe no story on this list is as bitter as Kelsey Grammer's fate. He became so successful that every comeback after that started looking like a step down, even when other people would have called it a success. Most of the actors on this list fell because they never reached the top in the first place. Grammer was different. He had two peaks. From Cheers to Frasier, he pretty much did the impossible. On American television, he turned a supporting role into a whole empire of its own, then lived inside that empire long enough for it to become the standard. Britannica even points out that he was a rare case with the role of Frasier Crane, stretching across multiple series and helping him rack up a long list of Emmy nominations and wins. Frasier lasted 11 seasons, and on some level, it was not just a hit sitcom, it was status. That is exactly why the comeback with Back to You sounds so bitter. Fox had a new sitcom, had Kelsey Grammer, had Patricia Heaton, had a team strong enough to make people believe it would at least do just fine. But it did not. The show lasted only one season, and then stopped, and the whole project quickly became a very clear example of this. Once you have been Frasier Crane, a sitcom that is just okay is not enough anymore. Maybe the real question is whether we got too greedy. Maybe a decent result starts looking like failure once the bar has been set that high. Number 14. Nell Carter. Gimme a Break. Gimme a Break ran for 6 seasons on NBC, and Nell Carter was the soul of that show. She got Emmy nominations and Golden Globe nominations for playing Nell Harper, and even before that sitcom, she already had a Tony Award and a Primetime Emmy win for Ain't Misbehavin'. In other words, this was not just another familiar sitcom face. This had once been a performer with real force, with stage, with television, with talent nobody had to question. Then, You Take the Kids showed up as a very obvious comeback and practically died the second it touched the ground. The show had only 6 episodes, and 5 of them actually aired. That was not a comeback that slowly ran out of steam. That was a comeback that got cut off midstream. And that is the part that hurts. It gives you the feeling Nell Carter did not really lose, because she ran out of talent, but because television at that point no longer had enough patience for the kind of star she was. And if this was a cold, brief fall, one that was almost cut off halfway through, then the last person on this list leaves behind an even harder question. Would that final fall be humiliatingly painful, or even quieter than a door closing, with nobody bothering to look back? Number 15. Erin Moran. Happy Days. Erin Moran is the kind of story that makes people understand not every Hollywood fall comes with noise. Some stars just quietly drift away from the spotlight, and only when you look back do you realize you are mourning a whole era that has gone dark. And to be fair, Erin Moran really had been famous and heavily sought after. Happy Days ran for 11 seasons, more than 250 episodes, and Joni Cunningham was a real part of that world. She was loved enough that ABC spun her off into Joni Loves Chachi. Then, that very spin-off turned into The Fall. Joni Loves Chachi came on with plenty of expectations, but the ratings dropped and it ended after 17 episodes. And later, Erin Moran's life drifted through a lot of hardship before she passed away at the age of 56. Looking back at this whole list, I believe even more strongly in one very simple but very bitter truth. Sitcoms can turn a face into somebody the whole country feels like it knows, but they never promise that person a decent second chapter. Some fell because of addiction. Some got swallowed whole by the roles that made them famous. Some had networks make big bets on them and still ran out of steam. And some just quietly faded to the point that, by the time you noticed, a whole golden era had already been left behind. Out of these 15 names, who do you feel the sorriest for? And who do you think should have had a much better comeback than what Hollywood gave them? Also, what topic do you want the channel to do next? The most painfully failed spin-offs, sitcom stars trapped in their old roles, or those rare comeback stories that really did work? If you like this kind of content, remember to subscribe to the channel.